All right. Are we live? Are we live? I guess we are. Yes, we are live. Very welcome, everybody. Good afternoon. A very good afternoon. Welcome to today's practice session on critical reasoning and sentence correction. We've been tackling various concepts of these two things for, over 2 weeks now. So we'll be doing a little bit of practice today where uh, rest assured that I'll make sure that the session does not follow a same follow just the one arc, because I understand that when it comes to critical reasoning it can get a little heavy to solve a lot of questions one after another. So I'll mix it up so that after sentence correction we move into critical reasoning, and right after critical reasoning we move into sentence correction again, so that the arc does not either go upwards or downwards. It will be a topsy turvy session so that we keep engaged, so that our mind does not get blocked, right? Having said that, before we begin with the lesson, I'll give you a small introduction of the Unacademy platform. So Unacademy, my friends, is India's largest learning platform today when it comes to preparing for competition exams, and this channel is specifically for management exams like CAT, GMAT, NMAT, ZAT, and the likes. Yes. Now, when it comes to me, I'll be your instructor for various aspects of verbal ability and reading comprehension. My name is Prankur Arora. I've been a trainer and a coach for over 2 years now. I've consulted with various organizations on different aspects of communication. Organizations like Interglobe, Becton Dickinson, Marico, PGCIL, etc., etc. I am also a published author. I wrote this book called It's Not Funny. It is a work of satirical fiction, comedic humor, if you will. And if you're fond of reading, you can find it on Amazon. I also hold advanced certifications from an American organization called Leadership Management International. Advanced certifications in facilitation, the facilitation methodology specifically. And I run a production house called Tamasha Entertainment. That is my entrepreneurial venture where I take care of all my creative juices. The pedagogy of the Unacademy platform is really, really awesome. And why I say that is because, the pedagogy of your learning journey is very, very important whenever you're preparing for anything. And especially when it comes to virtual engagement, because, you don't have physical classes now, everything is going online. So, retaining that level of engagement and involvement virtually gets a little difficult, but the Unacademy platform takes care of that amazingly. We give you live classes where you can chat with your educator, engage in discussions, ask your doubts in real time. We conduct live tests and quizzes, various polls that you can participate in while the lesson is going on, and you get a chance to feature on the leaderboard. All the courses on the platform are structured courses. They're made by, they're created by subject matter experts. They're really, really up to date. Plus, with one subscription, you get access to anything and everything. All kinds of recorded courses and live courses, and you can access them whenever, wherever. As I mentioned, the educators on the platform are really credible people who've mentored a lot of students successfully into various B schools. You can experience the Plus platform for free and then decide for yourself whether you want to include this in your learning journey or not. Even if you join today, right? Batches and courses come up on the platform on a daily basis, so that won't be a hassle. Plus, if you join today, everything that has come before today, the recordings of it all are already available on the platform, so that's a really, really comfortable thing. Now, the entire ownership of setting your schedule is on you, because this is a virtual engagement. You decide what's going to work for you. You have that kind of ownership where you decide that, okay, fine, I want to study from this educator, or I want to enroll in that course. So you set your own schedule, you personalize your own schedule, and we send you those push notifications and those reminders so that you don't miss out on anything that you've scheduled for yourself. uh, Educators on our platform also teach in vernacular languages, so we cut across any and every language barrier. Plus, as I mentioned, you set your own schedule, so you learn anytime, anywhere from the comfort of any of your devices. No conditions whatsoever. as I mentioned, the engagement on the platform when it comes to your interaction with whom you're learning from, it's really really high, right? Something like engaging in discussions in real time, asking your doubts and getting them cleared in real time, you know, participating in those live polls and quizzes, right? That kind of an engagement keeps your morale high, keeps your learning journey really really on track. A really important thing about any preparation is, how you're how you're adjusting your schedule, how you're adjusting your methodology based on your performance, right? So we evaluate that performance and we give you all those insights, those analytics, on the basis of which you can tweak your learning journey. For example, if you're not doing so well in one, right, you can decide that, you know what, I'm going to denote more time to this. And if I'm doing well in other aspects, then those things don't really need much of a time, right? So those kind of tweaks can happen if you have that evidence right in front of you, and we give you that. Now, coming down to, the most important thing, a competition, preparing for a competition exam is a long journey, right? Because it is a long journey. You have that gestation period where you're developing comfort level with all the topics, comfort level with your educator, right? So you have to give yourself that opportunity. So I would recommend that you opt in for a longer subscription. Plus you can see, right, you can see for yourself. Read this for a bit and then I lead you into the explanation. All right, understand the passage. What is the passage telling you? What is the premise? We already know that this is the conclusion, therefore is your trigger word for the conclusion. What you have to do is, you have to choose one of the options to which the conclusion is vulnerable, right? Which of these will weaken your conclusion? That is what you have to find out. Take 60 seconds. Take 60 seconds. Try to reach your answer. Hit me up with your answer in on the chat, and then I'll explain it all to you. ओके, नाउ व्हाट इज योर प्रेमाइस? प्रेमाइस क्या है आपका? आपका प्रेमाइस ये है कि राय जो है, दैट कैन बी यूज टू कंट्रोल वीड्स, राइट? दैट कैन बी यूज टू कंट्रोल वीड्स, बट राय का ड्यूरेशन क्या है? 45 डेज। 45 डेज तक ही वो कर सकता है, 45 डेज के बाद नहीं कर सकता। देन दे आर सेइंग कि कोई भी मेजर एग्रीकल्चरल क्रॉप, फॉर इट टू मच्योर फ्रॉम सीड, इट इज वेरी अनलाइकली कि वो 45 डेज में क्रॉप ग्रो करेगा। फिर वो कह रहे हैं कि जो सिंथेटिक हर्बिसाइड्स हैं, दे आर ऑल्सो वैलिड ओनली फॉर 45 डेज, बट दे कैन बी रीअप्लाइड। तो हर्बिसाइड्स को बार बार 45 डेज के लिए यूज करा जा सकता है। तो कंक्लूजन का है, कंक्लूजन इज दैट देयर फोर वी कैन नॉट यूज राई। Rye can play no role in effective weed control. Right? So this is your conclusion. This is your premise. What is your assumption? Your assumption is that these two things can they be used together? What if I use rye for 45 days and then herbicides for 45 days? Or what if I use herbicides for 45 and then rye for 45? Right? Why can I not use these two together or these two one after another? Right? So this is your assumption. Are you getting my point? For example, if you attended my first lesson on critical reasoning, I gave you an example. I'll repeat that example right now because we are reaching an assumption here, right? So my example was that I have a car. मेरे पास एक गाड़ी है, and that car has broken down, and I have to go to a market, right? I have a car, that car has broken down, and I have to go to the market. Because my car is broken down, my conclusion is therefore I cannot go to the market. मेरी कार टूटी हुई है तो मैं मार्केट नहीं जा पाऊंगा. This is my conclusion. Now, what are my assumptions in this case? What are my assumptions in this case? There are two assumptions that I am making. My first assumption is that I cannot use any other transport. I can only use my car. What if I call an auto rickshaw? What if I call an Uber? What if I use my own bicycle? Right? Any other transport. That is my assumption, that I cannot use any other transport. What is my second assumption? My second assumption is that my car is broken down but I cannot repair it. Can I not repair it myself? Or what if I call someone to repair it for me? Right? My second assumption is that the car cannot be repaired. तो आपका अगर इन दोनों में से कोई भी assumption को हम लोग टैकल करेंगे, आपका conclusion weak हो जाएगा. If I object to any of these assumptions, your conclusion will weaken. This is what the question is asking you to do. The question is asking you to find out which of these options will weaken an assumption and therefore your conclusion. Which of these options will object to your assumption and weaken this conclusion? Alright? Try to give me that answer. Okay, Anushka, I can see that you retracted your message. Give me your answer, Anushka, and then we'll discuss it. Another 30 seconds, and then I'll move into the explanation for this question. Okay, let's go one by one. Let's look at all the options. Your first option is option A. So फिर से मैं ये रीड करूंगा. The argument is most vulnerable to the objection that it fails to. Does the argument fail to consider that there might be minor quick growing crops that do mature in 45 days or less? We are not concerned with minor crops, we are concerned with only major crops, right? And we are concerned with weed control strategies for these two major crops, right? For the weed control strategies for these two options, one is rye and the other is synthetic herbicides. तो हमें minor crops का कुछ लेना है देना नहीं है, therefore I'll eliminate this. Let me look at B. Fails to identify any alternative method of weed control that could be used instead of the method it rejects. What is the method it is rejecting? It is rejecting rye. Is it failing to consider alternative method? No, it is not, because it is telling us about herbicides. Herbicides is an alternative method. So B is also incorrect. Anushka says D. Okay, Anushka, let me look at whether you've gotten it right or not. Objection that it fails to distinguish among the various kinds of synthetic herbicides. We are not discussing various kinds of synthetic herbicides. We are discussing whether rye can be used or not. We are discussing whether rye can be used or not only for major agricultural crops. So we are not concerned about other kinds of synthetic herbicides at all. D. Uh, Allow for the possibility of combining the two weed control methods it mentions. Yes, this looks to be the correct answer. You've gotten it right, Anushka. Why does it look to be the correct answer? Because, see, your conclusion is blatantly rejecting rye. But what if I use rye for 45 days and then I use, herbicide for 45 days and recycle herbicides again after 45 days? Right? So, or what if I use them together? We are not considering that possibility at all. That is what the argument is the most vulnerable to. Yes, so this looks to be the correct answer. Let me look at E. Allow for the possibility that plants other than rye handled the same way might have the same effect. Well, we are not concerned with that at all. We are only concerned with rye and we're only concerned with synthetic herbicides. So I hope you've understood how I reached this conclusion, how I reached option D as the correct answer. Alright, let's move into a sentence correction question now. Alright, In 1850, Lucretia Mott published her Discourse on Women, arguing in a treatise for women to have equal political and legal rights and for changes in the married women's property laws. Okay, solve this question. Don't take more than 90 seconds and hit me up in the chat with your answer, and then we'll discuss it. I'll give you a hint. This question is testing parallelism. This question is testing parallelism, guys. Try to reach the answer. Plus, I'll give you another hint. In 1850, Lucretia Mott published her Discourse on Women. Now, this is your modifier. What should come right after the comma? This is your modifier, right? What should come right after your comma? I've given you two hints now. Alright, I'll break this down for you further now. I'll break this down for you further. Lucretia Mott published her discourse on women. What are the two things that she's arguing for? She's arguing for women to have equal rights. That is number one. And she's arguing for changes in the married women's property laws. So she's arguing for two things. And these two things, they have to be parallel with each other. They have to be uniform in their construction. Okay, Anushka finally says option C. Let's look at whether she's getting it right or not. So this is a modifier, as I told you. What is the Discourse on Women that she published? It is a treatise. So right after your comma, right after your comma, what should come? A treatise should come, right? So therefore we eliminate options A and B right away. ठीक है? अब हमारी ये दो चीजें पैरेलल होनी चाहिए. इसका कंस्ट्रक्शन है फॉर चेंजेस इन द मैरिड वुमेन्स प्रॉपर्टी लॉज. तो इसका कंस्ट्रक्शन होना चाहिए फॉर विमेन टू हैव इक्वल पॉलिटिकल एंड लीगल राइट्स. अ ट्रीटीज दैट एडवोकेट्स women's rights, equal political and legal rights. Anushka, this is again incorrect because आप इसका कंस्ट्रक्शन देखो for changes in married women's. तो ये भी for क्या कहते हैं, a treatise that argued for equal political and legal rights for women. जब हम advocates use कर रहे हैं, when we are using advocates, Anushka, advocates for what? Right? So that preposition is missing. Okay, and for changes in the married women's property laws should be parallel with for equal political and legal rights. She's arguing for two things. That is why I'll eliminate D as well and I'll go with option E. A treatise that argued for equal political and legal rights for women and for changes in the married property women's laws. Alright, now these two are parallel. Remember, this is your 1 and this is your 2, and 1 and 2 have to be parallel with each other. Okay, I hope you've understood this explanation. Let's move into the next question now. We are again going to a critical reasoning question. Which of the following, if true, most strongly support the summit's explanation of its success in retaining employees? तो ये कौन सा क्वेश्चन है? This is your strengthening question. This is again your evaluation question where we have to figure out which of these options will strengthen your conclusion. To identify which of these will strengthen the conclusion, one of them have to be true for the conclusion to work. Yes, let's read the passage. Most employees in the computer industry move from company to company, changing jobs several times in their careers. However, Summit Computers is known throughout the industry for retaining its employees. Summit credits its success in retaining employees to its informal, non hierarchical work environment. Which of these options supports your conclusion? Supports the explanation, right? Which of the following supports the explanation? Take a couple of minutes to understand the passage and the options, and I'll explain the passage in more detail to you. Okay, I'll explain the passage to you now. I hope you've read the entire question along with the options. So, the passage is telling us that there is a company called Summit Computers. Summit Computers says that we retain our employees because we have an informal, non hierarchical work environment. ठीक है. और प्रेमाइस क्या था? प्रेमाइस ये था कि कंप्यूटर इंडस्ट्री में most employees shift their jobs. They change their jobs a lot of times. Summit says we are able to retain our employees. Our employees don't change their jobs because we have an informal, non-hierarchical work environment. Okay, Anushka says option B is the correct answer. Let's look at whether she's gotten it right. So we'll go from one option to another. Option A says some people employed in the computer industry change jobs if they become bored with their current projects. ठीक है, तो लोग क्यों जॉब चेंज करते हैं? क्योंकि वो बोर हो जाते हैं. But the passage is not telling us whether people get bored in informal, non-hierarchical environment or not. Maybe it is possible that even in an informal and non-hierarchical environment, people are getting bored. But even if they're getting bored at Summit Computers, they're not changing their jobs. We need a reason for that. This is not giving us that reason. This is not supporting what Summit Computers has given as its explanation. Therefore, we eliminate option A. Let's look at B, which Anushka says is the correct answer. A hierarchical work environment hinders the cooperative exchange of ideas that computer industry employees consider necessary for their work. So, what is this option telling you? This option is telling you कि hierarchical work environment में exchange of ideas easily नहीं हो पाता. Summit Computer says हमारा non hierarchical environment है, तो मे बी एक्सचेंज ऑफ आइडियाज हो पाता है एंड दैट इज वाई एम्प्लॉयज स्टे देयर. सो दिस इज अ वैलिड रीजन. दिस कैन सपोर्ट Summit's explanation. Good job, Anushka. This looks to be the correct answer. Let's look at other options still. Many of Summit senior employees had previously worked at only one other computer industry. Employee history here is irrelevant because once they arrive at Summit, they're not going anywhere, and we need a reason for that. So employee history is irrelevant and we'll eliminate this option. Let's look at D. In a non hierarchical work environment, people avoid behavior that might threaten group harmony and thus avoid discussing with their colleagues any dissatisfaction they might have with their jobs. So, this says that because it is a non hierarchical environment, people don't discuss dissatisfaction. But that does not mean dissatisfaction is not there. The discussion is not happening, right? But maybe the dissatisfaction is still there, but regardless of that dissatisfaction, they are not changing their jobs, and we still need a reason for that. D is not giving us any reasons, therefore we eliminate D. Let's look at E. The cost of living near Summit is relatively low compared to areas in which some other computer companies are located. This is also giving us a financial motive. But is this financial motive as relevant as a non hierarchical work environment? We don't know that. We don't know whether cost of living is actually even a factor. We need more information to know that employees consider cost of living as an important factor. All right. Therefore, we need more information and we eliminate option E. Option B, Anushka, is the correct answer. Good job. Let's move into another sentence correction question now. Carnivorous mammals can endure what would otherwise be lethal levels of body heat because they have a heat exchange network which kept the brain from getting too hot. This is a verb form question. I'm already giving you a hint. Alright. Take some time, solve it, hit me up with your answer on the chat, and then we'll discuss it. Look at the tenses, my friends. Remember the rule of the tenses that we discussed? Look at the tenses in this question. That will give you your answer. Okay, Anushka says option B. Very quick with this one, Anushka. Good job. So, carnivorous mammals can endure what would otherwise be lethal levels of body heat because they have a heat exchange network which यहाँ पे क्या होना चाहिए? This is simple present, this is simple present. Now they are talking about facts of life. Remember the rule of tenses. Whenever we're talking about facts, whenever we're talking about general truths, right? Whenever we're talking about facts, we're talking about general truths. What form do they take? They take a simple present form. We need simple present tense, which is already being used in other parts of the sentence, and that is why we need this to be keeps. All right. Therefore, we'll have that keeps as the correct answer. Which kept is past, which has kept is again, that has been keeping again incorrect, having kept is again incorrect. Good job, Anushka. D is the correct answer. Let's move into a sentence correction question. Sorry, a critical reasoning question again. The politician challenges the journalist's argument by doing which of the following? So this is again an evaluation question. We have an argument and we have to evaluate that argument. Journalist says, in late 1994, the present government of the Republic of Belem came into power. Each year since then, about 30 journalists have been imprisoned for printing articles that criticize the government. This is something that happens in our country as well, by the way. In 1994, under the old government, only 6 journalists were imprisoned for criticizing the government. So the old government was more tolerant of criticism by the press than the new one is. So this is a conclusion that the journalist is making. Politician argues, but in 1994, only 6 journalists criticize the government, and now journalists routinely do. This is how the politician is countering the journalist's argument. Which of these options, which of these options actually tell us what the politician is doing? Okay. Is the politician presenting data? Is the politician introducing evidence? Is the politician questioning the accuracy? Is the politician pointing out that the argument illegitimately draws a general conclusion? Is the politician stating that the argument reads information uh, about some members of a group as if it applies to the whole? Right? So you have these 5 options. Go through them again, take some time, and hit me up with your answer. See, the way to solve this correctly is इसके अंदर जो जर्नलिस्ट का आर्ग्यूमेंट है इसमें आइडेंटिफाई करो व्हाट इज योर प्रीमाइस एंड देन व्हाट इज योर कंक्लूजन. All right, the bridge between your premise and your conclusion is your assumption. Identify what is the assumption that the journalist is making. That will give you your answer. Okay, Anushka says option C. All right, Anushka, let's discuss whether you've gotten it right. So, what is the premise? The premise is basically that the journalist is saying कि 1994 में जो present government थी वो power में आई. Now, every year since 1994, the premise is 30 journalists are imprisoned. But वो कह रहे हैं 1994 पुरानी government के under only 6 journalists were imprisoned. So the conclusion is that the previous government was more tolerant to criticism as compared to the current government. The politician in turn counters that in 1994 there were only 6 journalists who criticized the government, and the previous government imprisoned all of them. So the politician is saying the previous government was not more tolerant. Why? Because there were only 6 journalists who criticized the government and they imprisoned all 6. So the politician is saying that today, because 30 journalists are criticizing us, we are imprisoning all 30. So there is no question of less or more tolerance, because वहां पे जर्नलिस्ट ही 6 थे जिन्होंने क्रिटिसाइज किया था उस टाइम पर. राइट. सो what can be the assumption? The journalist is making your assumption that there were 30 journalists criticizing the government back then also. Out of those 30, only 6 were imprisoned. Right? That is your assumption that the journalist is making, that there could have been any number of journalists who were criticizing and only 6 were imprisoned. Right? Now let's look at every option one by one. Option A says presenting data that extends further into the past. No, they are not presenting data that extends further into the past. Why? Because we are talking about 1994 and the years that come after 1994. So this is incorrect. Let's look at B. Introducing evidence that undermines an assumption of the journalist's argument. Now this seems to be the correct answer. Why? Because because what is the politician doing? The politician is undermining the assumption of the journalist. What is the assumption of the journalist? We already discussed. The journalist assumes that there were more journalists criticizing the government in 1994. Out of the entire group, only six were imprisoned. But this politician says no, your assumption is incorrect because I am giving you evidence कि वहां पे छह ही जर्नलिस्ट थे जिन्होंने क्रिटिसाइज किया और वो छह के छह इम्प्रिजन हो गए थे, right? So the politician is actually attacking the assumption of the journalist, and that is why this seems to be the correct answer. Let's look at all the other options still. Option C tells me that the politician is questioning the accuracy of the evidence. No, the politician is not questioning the accuracy of the evidence. Why? Because the politician is agreeing to the accuracy. The politician is only questioning the assumption. The politician agrees कि हाँ हम 30 को जेल में डाल रहे हैं और हाँ उस टाइम पे 6 ही जर्नलिस्ट गए थे. पॉलिटिशियन आपको और इंफॉर्मेशन बिल्ड करके दे रहा है और एविडेंस दे रहा है, एक्यूरेसी को नहीं क्वेश्चन कर रहा है. Pointing out that the argument illegitimately draws a general conclusion on the basis of a sample of only a few cases. No, because that is the sample. We are not illegitimately drawing conclusion. The journalist is not doing that. The journalist is considering the entire lot of cases. But the journalist is not reaching a conclusion based on a small sample size. So therefore, this is again incorrect. Stating that the argument treats information about some members of a group as if it applies to all members of that group. No, the journalist is not doing that. The journalist is talking about journalists only and the imprisonment of journalists. And the politician is not saying that your information is incorrect, because the politician also agrees that we are talking about journalists and we are talking about imprisonment of those journalists. So, guys, option B seems to be the correct answer. I hope you've understood this explanation, Anushka, as to why B seems to be the correct answer and C was incorrect. All right, let's move on to another question. Now, this is a sentence correction question again. Building on civilizations that preceded them in coastal Peru, the the Mochica developed their own elaborate society based on cultivating such crops like corn and beans, the harvesting of fish and shellfish, and exploiting other wild and domestic resources. So I'll give you a hint. This entire question is giving you a list. There is a list in this question. That list has three elements, and you have to check for parallelism in those three elements. You have to check whether all those three elements are uniform in their construction or not. Take 90 seconds, solve this, and then I'll give you the explanation. Check for the elements. What are the elements? Cultivation, harvesting, and exploiting. And everything that comes before these elements applies equally to every element in the list. All right, look at these three elements now, right? Building on civilizations that preceded them in coastal Peru, the Mochica developed their own elaborate society. Now, this part applies equally to everything that is coming in your list. Based on cultivating such crops like corn and bees, the harvesting of fish and shellfish, and exploiting other wild animals, wild and domestic resources. Now, the construction of this element, this is your first element, has to be uniform with this element and has to be uniform with this element. So, all these three elements, exploitation, cultivation, and harvesting, they have to be uniform, they have to be parallel. Plus, whenever now whenever we are giving examples using this construction, cultivating such crops like, example हम लोग कैसे देते हैं, हम देते हैं such crops as, क्योंकि like is used for talking about similar things, but here you're not talking about similar things, you're talking about what, like is used to tell us about similarity. Like किस लिए होता है, similarity के लिए यूज होता है. एग्जाम्पल्स के लिए क्या यूज होता है, एग्जाम्पल्स के लिए सच एज यूज होता है. तो फर्स्ट ऑफ, you will eliminate all the options that are using the expression such crops like. You eliminate option A, such crops as, ये ठीक है इस कंस्ट्रक्शन में. एंड बेसिंग कल्टिवेशन ऑफ क्रॉप्स लाइक, अगेन क्रॉप्स लाइक नहीं होगा, क्रॉप्स एज होगा, based it on cultivation of crops such as. So we have B and D. A and C हमने already eliminate कर दिया. अब हमें B और D में क्या check करना है? We have to check of parallelism of these three elements. Cultivation of such crops as this, harvesting of fish and, now look at this, cultivation of, harvesting of, एक्सप्लॉयटेशन ऑफ, यहां भी द यूज हुआ है, यहां भी द यूज हुआ है, यहां भी द यूज हुआ है. सो दिस लुक्स टू बी द करेक्ट आंसर. लेट्स लुक एट डी. एंड दे बेस्ड इट ऑन their cultivation of crops such as this, the harvest of fish, and exploiting the harvest, their cultivation, these are not parallel at all, and therefore B is our correct answer, guys. I hope you've understood this explanation. I hope you reached the similar conclusion. Let's move on to another question of critical reasoning now. Which of the following strategies would be most likely to minimize company X's losses on the policies? Okay, so we are talking about a company X. Let's read the passage. Insurance company X is considering issuing a new policy to cover services required by elderly people who suffer from diseases that afflict the elderly. Premiums for the policy must be low enough to attract customers. Therefore, now this is your premise and this is your conclusion, right? Therefore, this is a trigger word. Therefore, company X is concerned that the income from the policies would not be sufficient to pay for the claims that would be made. ठीक है, अब आपको क्या करना है? Read this passage again, read your question, read your options, understand the explanation of it all. I'll give you an explanation in a couple of minutes, but use that time to understand this for yourself. This is again your argument evaluation question. ऐसे क्वेश्चन आपकी रीडिंग कॉम्प्रिहेंशन में बहुत ज़्यादा आएंगे गाइस. Logically you have to evaluate the question, right? Such questions will be a big feature of your reading comprehension portion of the exam. Okay, now let me explain the argument of the passage. What is the passage telling us? Passage is telling us there is an insurance company X. इंश्योरेंस कंपनी को क्या करना है, उन्हें नया प्रोडक्ट लॉन्च करना है बूढ़े लोगों के लिए, elderly people who suffer from diseases that afflict the elderly. ठीक है, so only the diseases that afflict them when they're elder, when they're old. They are saying premiums for this policy must be low क्योंकि हमें बूढ़े लोगों को अट्रैक्ट करना है. बूढ़े लोगों की इनकम जनरली इतनी होती नहीं है, तो उनके प्रीमियम्स भी कम होने चाहिए. नाउ दे आर सेइंग कि यार बट दिस रेजेस द कंसर्न that we won't be able to earn enough from this vertical in our company because their premiums would not be enough to pay for the claims that they make. ठीक है, तो जब भी इंश्योरेंस होती है, वेन एवर यू बाय एन इंश्योरेंस, you pay some premiums, right? And then when you want to use that insurance, for example, when you insure your car, right, so you pay an annual premium for the car insurance. Now when you get into an accident or someone hits you, you use that insurance, right? You then use that insurance, and for example, if you're paying 10,000 as your premium, after your accidental insurance you could claim 2 lakh rupees, right? But the scale there is that if 100 people are buying your insurance and only one person is claiming it, because not there is very less probability that all 100 cars will get into an accident, right? So similarly, what they are saying is that, we are only talking about old people, and old people will pay, the premiums have to be low. At the same time, old people, they have a lot of diseases, they have a lot of health issues, and we are only talking about covering the diseases that afflict those old people. So if they claim it, our premiums would not be able to compensate for the claims. Now what you have to do is you have to figure out from these five options which of these five will actually give you a strategy to counteract on your conclusion, right? You have to choose a strategy that will minimize your losses. Okay. uh, Okay, let me take you through the options one by one now. What does option A say? Option A says attracting middle aged customers likely to submit claims for benefits for many years. Unlikely to submit claims. So, what they are saying is, what if हम लोग elderly की जगह middle aged लोगों को बेचना शुरू करें, और क्योंकि हमारे diseases खाली elderly वाले होंगे. So what they're saying is, for example, if you're covering a disease that only affects people who are 60-year-old, we want to sell this policy to 40 or 50 year olds who will keep on paying us premiums. So हमारी इनकम बन जाएगी, और वो 20 साल तक क्लेम भी नहीं करेंगे क्योंकि डिसीज तो 60 साल की उम्र में हमें अफेक्ट करेगा, राइट? सो दिस लुक्स टू बी अ वैलिड पॉइंट. लेट्स put this on the back burner and look at other options. B says ensuring only those individuals who did not suffer any serious diseases as children. Ensuring only those individuals who did not suffer any serious diseases as children. Does this affect your tendency to, you know, get a disease when you're old or not? We don't know that. We don't know that because this is irrelevant to us. क्या पता बचपन में ना हुआ हो बट बुढ़ापे में हो जाए. We need more information to reach that conclusion, which the passage is not giving us, so we'll eliminate option B. Option C, including a greater number of services in the policy than are included in other policies of lower cost. If we include more services, we'll have more claims, and we don't want that. We want to cover our losses, we don't want to increase our losses. So we eliminate C. Let's look at D. Ensuring only those individuals who were rejected by other companies for similar policies. If other individuals are rejected by other companies, then even if we insure them, what are the chances that they will not claim? People are mostly rejected from insurance companies if their tendency to claim insurance is very, very high, right? We don't want that. We want to avoid our losses. We don't want to increase our losses. Let's look at E. Ensuring only those individuals who are wealthy enough to pay for the medical services. Even if they're wealthy enough to pay for medical services, if we insure them, they can claim. They can claim insurance. We want to avoid claims for as long as we can, and only one option is giving us that, which is option A, and therefore we go with option A and we eliminate all other options. I hope you've understood this explanation, guys. I hope you've understood this. All right, let's move into another sentence correction question now. Galileo was convinced that natural phenomena, as manifestations of the laws of physics, would appear the same to someone on the deck of a ship moving smoothly and uniformly through the water as a person standing on land. Okay, take 90 seconds, solve this, and then I'll give you the explanation. Uh, I'll give you a hint. I'll give you a hint in the meanwhile. This is the case of correlatives. We are using a correlative here. This is a parallelism question. Parallelism within that correlative. We are drawing a comparison between two things. I'll give you another hint. Right? We are drawing a comparison in this and this. To someone on the deck of a ship moving smoothly and uniformly through the water as a person standing on land. So there is a comparison going on. You have to check for the kind of correlative we need to draw this comparison so that our expressions are parallel. Okay, I'll give you another hint now. Another hint as to how we can approach this. Just give me a moment. Give you another hint. Whenever we have something like this, the expression that we use is right 2x as to y. Right? Your x here is what? Is someone. Y here is person. Right? Same to x as to y. This is how your correlative is formed in such cases. Alright? Therefore, this will be your answer because this is the only construction that is giving you your parallelism in the correlative. Right? Same to x as to y. just as it would to a, this is again incorrect, as it would to the, again incorrect, just as to the, incorrect, water as to a person is correct, water as a person, as to is necessary for us, right? Therefore we go with option B. All right, I hope you've understood this explanation. Let's move into another critical reasoning question now. Which of the following, if true, most seriously weakens the conclusion above? Right? So, this is again an argument evaluation question. You have to evaluate the argument. Right? There is a premise, there is a conclusion. You have to evaluate which of these will actually refute the assumption. Right? Because one of these will refute the assumption, and the one that refutes the assumption will be weakening the conclusion. All right. So, what is your premise? Your premise is red blood cells in which the malaria fever parasite resides are eliminated from a person's body after 120 days. Because the parasite cannot travel to a new generation of red blood cells, any fever that develops in a person more than 120 days after that person has moved to a malaria free region is not due to the malarial parasite. This is your conclusion. This is what? This is your conclusion. This is your premise. Find out what the assumption is and figure out which of these is attacking that assumption, and you'll have your answer. Take a couple of minutes and then I'll explain it. Alright, guys, let's try to understand what the passage is saying. What is the passage telling us? What is our premise? The passage is telling us कि जो red blood cells होते हैं जिसमें मलेरिया का पैरासाइट आता है, they are eliminated from a person's body after 120 days. Very simple, okay. Then they are saying because the parasite cannot travel to a new generation of red blood cells. वो क्या कह रहे हैं? वो कह रहे हैं रेड ब्लड सेल्स जिनमें पैरासाइट होता है वो 120 दिन के बाद हटा देते हैं. फिर वो कह रहे हैं पैरासाइट किसी और रेड ब्लड सेल में ट्रैवल नहीं कर सकता. ठीक है, तो उसके बाद कोई भी फीवर आपका डेवलप होगा आफ्टर 120 days has it is not due to malaria at all. What is your assumption here? Your assumption here is that red blood cells is the only region where parasite resides. What if the parasite resides in any other region of your body? Right? This is your assumption. Now we have to find out if there is any option from among these five which is attacking this assumption or is attacking some other assumption that we've not thought of. Let's look at it one by one. Option A. The fever caused by the malaria parasite may resemble the fever caused by flu viruses. We are not talking about flu viruses at all. What are we talking about? We are concerned with whether जो फीवर हमारे 120 दिन के बाद होगा वो मलेरिया से होगा या नहीं होगा. अब वो क्या कह रहे हैं कि मलेरिया से जो फीवर होता है वो फ्लू वायरस के फीवर को रिजेंबल करता है, बट वो हो तो मलेरिया से ही रहा है ना, राइट? We want to know if the fever can be caused by anything else. The fever cannot be caused by malaria, is what the passage is claiming. This is again irrelevant. Option B, the Anopheles mosquito, which is the principal insect carrier, has been eradicated in many parts of the world. This is positive news, but this is not telling us whether the malaria parasite can reside in any other part of the body or not. All right. So this is not weakening the argument. This is giving an extra information which is out of the scope of the question. All right. Therefore, we eliminate option B, because in this case this says that malaria ho nahi sakta, but in this case what are we judging? We are saying someone already had contracted malaria, right? That is the kind of that is the kind of person we are dealing with, someone who has already contracted malaria. Look at option C. Many malarial symptoms other than the fever, which can be suppressed with anti-malarial medication, can reappear within 120 days after the medication is discontinued. See, we are not talking about medication at all. This may look as if, what, यार ये देख के तो हम कंफ्यूज हो गए, ये सही हो सकता है शायद. We are not concerned with symptoms subsiding with medication. We're not talking about medication. What are we talking about? We're talking about eliminating red blood cells from a person's body and then someone developing a fever. Because right now we are saying that red blood cells के अंदर ही parasite जाता है. Okay? So we're not talking about, anti-malarial medication and how symptoms can reappear if the medication is discontinued. We're not talking about that at all. That is out of scope. Let's look at D. In some cases, the parasite that causes malaria travels to cells of the spleen. Yes, this is another part of the body that the passage is not talking about. Passage is saying रेड ब्लड सेल्स में होता है, बट पैसेज ने ये नहीं बताया कि यार और भी तो बॉडी पार्ट होते हैं जिनके अंदर पैरासाइट जा सकता है, विच इज व्हाट ऑप्शन डी इज टेलिंग यू, right? Spleens are less frequently eliminated from a person's body than are red blood cells, and therefore, if the parasite is in the spleen, it can cause fever still. All right, so it weakens the argument, weakens the conclusion of the argument. All right, D looks to be the correct answer, but let me validate it from with option E as well. In any region infested with malaria carrying mosquitoes, there are individuals who appear to be immune to malaria. We are not concerned with those individuals. We are concerned with people who've already contracted malaria. All right, guys. So just look at the methodology that I followed. I identified the premise, I identified the conclusion, I found a gap in the conclusion. That gap was the assumption. The assumption was कि भाई और किसी बॉडी पार्ट में आपका पैरासाइट नहीं जाएगा, पैरासाइट खाली रेड ब्लड सेल्स में जाएगा, तो आप रेड ब्लड सेल्स हटा दोगे तो उससे कुछ उसके बाद मलेरिया आपको कुछ हो ही नहीं सकता. बट फ्रॉम दिस ऑप्शन इट इज वेरी क्लियर दैट स्प्लीन में भी पैरासाइट सेल्स जाते हैं. ठीक है, तो स्प्लीन हमारा फ्रीक्वेंटली एलिमिनेट नहीं करते बॉडी से, रेड ब्लड सेल्स ही एलिमिनेट करते हैं. तो स्प्लीन के अंदर अगर पैरासाइट चला गया तो आपका मलेरिया फिर से रिकर हो सकता है. ऑल राइट, दैट इज वाई आई वेंट विद ऑप्शन डी. आई होप यू अंडरस्टूड दिस एक्सप्लेनेशन गाइज. लेट्स मूव on to a sentence correction question now. In ancient Celtic Europe, the beating of the bounds were a series of ritualistic thrashes with a hazel or birch branch on the limits of a village or township, meant to protect the area from evil spirits, although the reasoning behind those thrashes are still vague. What is the option telling you? What is the question telling you? The question, let me give you a hint, is testing subject verb agreement foremost. And then there are another rules. उसका hint मैं आपको 60 seconds के बाद दूंगा. Okay, guys, we're talking about subject verb agreement. Look for look for whether the verbs have to be singular or plural, right? This is plural. This is plural. Iska, this is a verb which is plural. This is a verb which is plural. Does this have to be plural? Does this have to be singular? What is this verb for? वो verb भी plural होना चाहिए, right? So figure out these things. Whenever, let me give you another hint. Whenever we're talking about collective nouns, they are always singular. Alright? For example, in ancient Celtic Europe, the beating of the bounds were a series of ritualistic thrashes. Series. What are we talking about? We're talking about beating of the bounds. We're not talking about only bounds. We're talking about beating of the bounds. Alright? When we're talking about beating of the bounds, it has to be singular. We're talking about beating of the bounds, it has to be singular. तो इसके लिए वर नहीं आएगा, उसके लिए आपका क्या आएगा? उसके लिए आपका was आएगा, right? So first off, we have to eliminate all the options that carry were as the verb for beating of the bounds. So this contains was, तो ठीक है, इसको बैक बर्नर पे डालते हैं. Bounds was, ठीक है, a series of were series of ritualistic thrashes were. नहीं, this is incorrect. Bounds was a ritualistic thrashes. ठीक है, ये भी बैक बर्नर पे आ गया. Next, we have R, right? So, meant to protect an area from evil spirits was performed. Now, this is in tandem with beating of the bounds with a hazel or birch branch on the limits of a village or township, although the reasons behind those thrashes are still vague. So R is referring to reasons here. So therefore this seems to be the correct answer, क्योंकि यहाँ पे दोनों verbs agreement में आ रहे हैं. मैं B और D को अब validate करता हूँ. ठीक है, bounds was तो ठीक है, was a series of thrashes meant to protect the area from evil spirits, although the reasoning is behind those thrashes are still vague. R के साथ reasoning नहीं आएगा, reasoning is singular, right? So reasoning and R are not going well together. That is why I'll eliminate option D. Let me look at option D. Series of ritualistic thrashes with a hazel or birch branch on the limits of the village or township means to protect the area from evil spirits, although the reasons behind those thrashes are still. Ye means to protect the area is looking very, very awkward. Very, very awkward, right? This means to almost shifts the meaning a little bit. Therefore, I'll eliminate D. A is looking to be correct. Subject verb agreement भी है. Meaning भी हल्का सा भी change नहीं हो रहा है आपके option का. Therefore, we'll go with option A. Let's look at a critical reasoning question now. Which of the following logically completes the argument given below? People in isolated rainforest communities. Now, this is not an argument evaluation question. This is an argument construction question. ठीक है, आपको एक argument दिया गया है, आपको एक passage दिया है. What do you have to do? You have to complete that passage. People in isolated rainforest communities tend to live on a largely vegetarian diet, and they eat little salt. Few of them suffer from high blood pressure, and their blood pressure does not tend to increase with age, as is common in industrialized countries. Such people often do develop high blood pressure when they move to cities and adopt high salt diets. Though suggestive, These facts do not establish salt as the culprit in high blood pressure, however, because dash. Alright, take a couple of minutes, read all these options, and then I'll explain the passage. Okay, so what is the passage telling us? Passage is telling us that there are some people who live in rainforests. उनकी लार्जली वेजिटेरियन डाइट होती है और उस डाइट में बहुत कम सॉल्ट होता है. तो वो कह रहे हैं कि बहुत कम लोग हैं विद इन दिस कम्युनिटी हु सफर फ्रॉम हाई बीपी एंड दे आर सेइंग देयर बीपी डज नॉट टेंड टू इंक्रीज विद एज, जो कि कॉमन होता है इंडस्ट्रियलाइज सिटीज में. सो व्हाट दे आर सेइंग इज इफ आउटस्कर्ट्स ऑफ India, in the countryside regions of India, if people are living in villages or rainforest communities, they will have a, some of them have largely vegetarian diet, बहुत कम नमक खाते हैं, बीपी भी नहीं होता. But cities में, metro cities में, if you go, BP tends to increase with age. Now they are saying that some such people, they still develop high BP when they move to cities and adopt high salt diets. Okay, so now they are saying that when these people, यहाँ पे argument change हो रहा है आपका. They are saying when these people shift to cities, they develop high BP when they, adopt high salt diets. फिर वो कह रहे हैं कि इवन दो ऐसा लगेगा, इवन दो वील दिस इज सजेस्टिव, दिस फैक्ट डज नॉट एस्टैब्लिश कि salt is your main culprit when it comes to developing high BP. There can be other reasons, right? Now you have to figure out of these five, which logically completes this statement. Which of these options is giving you a counteractive reason, or is giving you a strong enough reason to say that salt cannot be the only culprit. Take another 60 seconds and then I'll explain the options. Okay, option A. Option A tells you that genetic factors. Wait a minute. Sorry. Yeah. What is option A telling you? Option A is talking about genetic factors could account for lack of increase of blood pressure with age among such people. But are we talking about that? What are we talking about? We're talking about that, some of these they develop high blood pressure after the shift to cities. Now we have to look for a reason that tells us that salt cannot be the only culprit, right? We have to look for a reason that says salt is not the only culprit. So talking about genetic factors that don't account for increase in blood pressure, that is secondary, that is irrelevant to the conclusion at hand. Option B. People eating high salt diets and living from birth in cities and industrialized societies generally have a tendency to have high blood pressure. But our passage is already telling us something in line, in tandem with that. Right now, that is not something that the conclusion is talking about. C. It is possible to have a low salt diet while living in a city in an industrialized country. Even if you're having a low salt diet, what are they saying? They're saying that we are already adopting high salt diets. We know there is a possibility, but we are saying we are already eating high salt diets and we want to look for other reasons for increase in BP, other reasons than salt, right? So having low salt diets Having an option like that is something we already know, but the conclusion is not concerned with that. There are changes in other aspects of diet when such people move to city. Now, yes, this is making some sense because, see, even if you're taking a high salt diet, even if you're taking a high salt diet now, think of something as common as, you know what, you're having chapati and you're having you know, a dry vegetable, and then you're having a liquid diet like something like dal, right? So you have chapati, you have rice, you have dal, you have a dry vegetable, and then you have some salad. You have all these components in a diet. Now imagine that salt is only used in the vegetables or perhaps in salad, but there are other components in your diet as well. Who will account for those other components? Is there is there a possibility that one of the other components is also causing high BP? There could be a possibility, right? So what are we saying? We are saying that there are other changes in aspects of diet as well apart from salt. These people, they were living largely on vegetarian diet. What if now that they're shifting to non-vegetarian diet, what if they're having something like, you know, chicken or something like mutton or something like a bacon? Who will account for those changes? We're only considering salt. What about other aspects of the diet, right? So this option is correctly, you know, taking us there, correctly including those other aspects of diet, bringing those other aspects of diet into consideration. Okay, let's look at E. Salt is a necessity for human life and death can occur when the blood loses too much salt. Again, this is talking about something that is not up for discussion. We are talking about something else. We are trying to reach a conclusion. We are trying to give a reason in the argument as to why salt is not the only culprit. Other aspects of the diet also have to be considered if we are talking about culprits for high BP. Okay, I hope you've understood this. Let's move on to the end of the lesson now. We've arrived at the end of the lesson. We practiced a lot of sentence correction and critical reasoning questions today, guys. Uh, Also, if you're free, I'll stream another video on this very channel at 6 p.m. today. So do even that lesson pertains to critical reasoning and sentence correction practice. So if you're up to it, join me again at 6 p.m. today where we'll solve more critical reasoning and sentence correction questions. Uh, and in that batch of questions, I'm mostly targeting assumption based questions and parallelism questions when it comes to sentence correction. All right, having said that, even if you're not joining, go through that video at a later time, perhaps tonight or tomorrow morning, and even this very lesson, go through this lesson again, right? Go through this lesson again, if not today, perhaps 2 days later. And when you're going through the lesson, pause the video whenever we come to a question, right? Pause the video, solve that question, and then play it again and look at my rationale and compare my rationale, my explanation to your explanation and your rationale, and see whether they are in sync. All right. uh, till then, guys, thank you for joining me in this lesson today. Stay safe, stay strong, and stay mellow. See you.